One. Real pleasure to have Paul Greenberg back, this time in the Analyst Cam series. And he's going to talk about his annual signature CRM Watchlist. Paul, are we going to talk about that, or are we going to talk about Tom Brady, baseball being back, March Madness?
Well, of course, what I'm going to talk about, what I'd rather talk about are two different things. Right. So the answer is yes, I'd rather talk about Tom Brady, baseball, and March Madness. However, I guess I'm going to talk about the CRM Watchlist. And once again, thanks for having me on again. Hey, by the way, what was the last series I was on then?
Remember you did one on...
No, I remember being on. I just didn't know I had a series associated with it.
It's called the Burning Platform series. And you talked about how, the next generation.
Oh, yeah.
You're passionate about.
Yeah. No, I remember the actual conversation. I just didn't. You said now he's on the Analyst series, right? So
Analyst Cam series.
Yeah.
This is where people present slides. This is where they present about new books, new products, new surveys. And so your CRM Watchlist fits.
Oh, so that means I get to. Well, so if we declared this the
burning
platform, I wouldn't.
You don't need to present any slides.
Okay, well, let's see which one it is. Let's see what happens.
Paul, we can cut through all this and just let's start talking about Tom Brady. No. Listen, that is your absolute defining annual contribution to the industry. So let's give it its fair share of 15-20 minutes.
That would be about 1 minute. That's a fair share.
Come on.
All right. Can you imagine humility and shared time shares? Right. So anyway,
you're being generous to the winners. Come on.
Yeah. So look, here's this thing. So this is the 19th year of the watch list, right? And used to be called this.
Is that old, Paul?
Yeah, I'm older than that. I started when I was 11. Right. So when I hit 30, I thought, maybe that's enough. Right. So it used to be called the Stepping Out Award, actually. It was actually emerged in I think it was the second edition of CRM at the Speed of Light, was where the first award actually emerged. Right. And then became an event. So the concept is very simple. It's an impact award. It's designed to look at two things. How much impact has a company had in the prior year? Meaning if it's the watch list, like this year was the watch list 2022, what impact did you have in 2021? And how well organized and situated are you to continue to have impact in 3 years? If you can't, over 3-year period, if you can't show me both, then you're not going to win this. There's no chance. And I make it exceptionally difficult to win. I mean, my ideal state would be of these total submissions, no one wins. Right? That's what I'm aimed for. I'm aimed to be a ruthless jerk, basically, when it boils down to
it. How many entries did you have this year?
This year was a little lower than normal, but normally I have about 70. This year I had 59. 16.
You really were a hard ass this year. Only 59.
Well, no, that's entries, right? That's nothing.
True.
Right. The winners was 16 total. And finalists were 23. Finalists were 23. But of those 23, 16 ultimately won something. And we'll get to that. So
of the 19 years, has anyone won every single year?
No.
Okay. So no. You truly are demanding.
No. Oh, very. I mean, there are companies that have won a majority, but the companies that would have, look, there's obviously, well, also let me kind of get down to what the content is, because that's really critical to this. This is not a how much impact has your technology had on the industry. This is how much impact has your company had. So technology is one of 13 or 14 categories that you have to be responsive to. Another one would be management team, financial status, or financial
performance.
Yeah, performance. Thank you. That was the exact word I was actually looking for. Um, Marketing, your marketing strategy, your partner alliances strategy, your outreach, your market impact according to you, your actual market impact according to the data you're going to give me, your mission, your vision, your culture. This year, there was a question on pandemic response. What was your pandemic response? All of these things, and there's more than that. All of these things are taken into account, and each one of them every year is annually weighted based on what's going on in the world that year. It's just twice, it gets weighted twice. When I announce the registration is open, meaning like this year, the 20th and last one will be this year, which will be CRM Watchlist 2023. It's open for registration as of last Thursday. The questionnaire has 2 new questions. Registration forms ready. Tightened up some things I thought needed some tightening, and winning was going to be even harder than it was this year. All right, but all of that, I wait right at the beginning. Then as we get close to submission time, I look at the weights to make sure they still sustain themselves over a year, and then I alter accordingly and adjust. And then, so all of that goes into a unweighted score, a weighted score, and then a final result. But in between there, I have a whole series of what I call intangibles, meaning I'm asking you in each category, I'm probably asking you 8 or 10 questions, which I insist you answer every last one as I asked it. So if I say, tell me a story about this, you better tell me a story about this or you're going to get dinged for it. And that intangibles are 50 some odd other things I'm looking for that you have no indication I'm looking for. The one and they can be positively impact your final score or negatively impact your final score. So I'll give one that I am willing to talk about publicly, which is competition bashing. If you competition bash inside that submission, you're going to get hit hard with negative on that final score. And the reason for that is what I'm asking you to do is tell me about your impact in that world for that year and 3 years plus, not what you think not the lack of impact your competition had. I don't care what these companies think about their competition. They're meaningless.
You're fairly, your scoring is very, very balanced then, right? Wall Street tends to focus much more on financial performance. There are some folks who are really hot on social responsibility, right? Yours is fairly balanced.
Well, it's meant to be a view of the company as a whole. Look, you know as well as I do, you know this from all your work on SAP and other things you've done, which is takes a lot to run a company, and your offering isn't all it takes, right? So look, 90% of the small business or small company failures that I run across are companies that probably had great technology, but didn't know how to do anything else, right? So they failed in the things they have to do. How do you market? How do you sell? Who's your management team? What kind of experience have they had so they know how to navigate? I mean, all of these are taken into account. And keep in mind, what I do is I print out, so for example, this year with the 59 entries I had 4,682 pages to read. Right. And I read every page. I printed out every one, read every page, scored all of them, and and then adjusted for intangibles. And then come as a result of that, then you get, like categories that will show up. Sort of notice the categories on the right. That's not the complete list of categories, but that is a partial list of the categories that I'm actually asking about. All of these things that you can see: technology, customers, privacy, partners, alliances, marketing strategy, outreach, market impact, culture, pandemic response, impact. But like things I left out, you'll notice I left out financial performance, management teams, just because they're a little too sensitive. Then what will happen is on the left, you'll see there are 3 ways to win, 3 levels of winning. There's winners with distinction, and elite. Each of them requires a final score that's then comes out with another number. That other number, it has to reach a certain threshold in order to even basically win, to get to distinction and elite. It's almost insanely hard to win with distinction, and it's even harder with elite. Like I haven't had an elite winner in 5 years, and I've only had, I think, 2, maybe 3 over all the years I've offered it, which is only about 10 of the 19. I had 4 winners with distinction this year. And that means that you've achieved a level even above and beyond the normal winners. So,
Yep.
Okay, Oracle won, ServiceNow won, Thunderhead won, right? Then they were acquired, and Zoho won. And Zoho had the highest overall score this year. Now, that you might say, well, yeah, ServiceNow and Oracle serve gigantic markets, or and Oracle especially is a gigantic company. How's Zoho get the highest score, or how's Thunderhead get a distinction? Keep in mind, part of when I talk about impact, it's based on the markets you serve, not on all the markets. So Oracle serves a gigantic market. They have to show they have to make a pretty big statement on what their impact is. Zoho serves a specific targeted smaller market. Thunderhead serves a specific kind of market. Years ago, when I was doing consulting companies, one year, Salvis Consulting, Jesus Hoyos' company, won. Why? Not because he has a global impact, he doesn't, but he has a huge impact in Latin America and proved it, right? He had actually, when I did the research against Accenture that year, just to see what their impact was in Latin America, and Jesus has exceeded theirs, right? So again, impact. Not based on financial performance per se, not based on any one category. You have to show all these categories. You have to show, let me rephrase it. You have to answer all these questions in all these categories of the company, number one. And number two is show me that you've had impact in the market you've chosen as the market you've had impact in. And if you can show that, you can win. Okay, these 4 won exceptionally well. Now I'll just quickly run.
Over the 19 years, have you had people like, 19 years ago, probably with more of a Salesforce automation focus.
Yeah.
Increasingly, we've been moving to marketing and more service. How has your evaluation criteria evolved?
Oh, they change every year. It changes. So, for example, I'll tell you an interesting story. First, though, this year, 2023 coming up, based on what I've seen last year, I added 2 more questions and then reweighted already about 6 different things, then changed, and some of it goes to some of the patterns that I saw emerging. Some of it changed from, let's say the weight would be 10% additional to 30% additional in one case. Some of them go down from, you can go below 0, meaning the weight could be 0.9 too, right? I mean, it just depends on all kinds of factors. So plus the criteria themselves change. Like, for example, the simplest one, there was no pandemic response criteria the first, 2 years ago. 2 years ago when the pandemic was just hitting, or last year rather, when it was peaking in 2021. I didn't do a CRM Watchlist 2021, what's going on in 2020. So there was no pandemic response question, but that does exist now. There's 2 new questions in 2023 based on changes in the world, what's going on generally, and also lacks I perceived in the way companies are, things the companies shouldn't be ignoring that that actually go to market impact. So I change every year, and sometimes I'll eliminate 1 sub question out of the category, add another one, I had 2 more, change the criteria for answering the question. It's very dependent on any given year. And I'll tell you a story. This is really interesting on how tricky this can be, because keep in mind, when I'm doing the watch list, I'm not doing it as an advisor to these companies or as an analyst. So I am not debating whether I agree with their strategy or not. I'm just looking at how well or poorly they execute it to have impact, right? And if the strategy has no impact, then for the purpose of the watch list, it's a bad strategy, obviously. But here's an example of one that I can give you that proves this point. Many years ago, when Gigya was still independent, Gigya entered the watch list and they won. And basically the market that they identified with at the time, and they were new to me. I mean, I knew the company, but they were new entries. They were not my clients or anything. I'd run into Patrick Salyer at events all the time, and I sit and talk with them. So they enter and they win for what was then social identity, which was what they focused on. So I write this blog and they win. And I write this blog post on them. And then I identify, which I do in all the blog posts on the companies that win, 3 things you need to do to maintain and continue your impact. And one of the things I suggested was more of advisory, really, with Giga, but it was public. It was on ZDNet. Was that they actually expand their market to identity management in a much bigger way.
Yeah.
And they did that. And they actually followed what I said and did that. And then they didn't win the next year. So they called me up and said, why'd we lose? I said, could you listen to me? Right. And they said, well, how does that get us to lose? I said, I'm not an advisor or an analyst. You're showing me impact. And you didn't have enough impact in identity management markets year 1, right? Come back with impact, you'll win, I'm sure, but you didn't. And so you lost. That's what I mean. As an advisor, one thing, but as the watch list, very different.
So, if I were to put this in terms of the Gartner Magic Quadrant, you've got 4 of them in the top right? So how come Oracle and ServiceNow, which are big companies, show up and SAP and Salesforce don't show up?
Well, okay. So some of it, what I have to keep is kind of, I can't really say to it because a lot of what companies give me and is marked accordingly when they know that when they submit that anything except the question on financial performance is considered public, fodder. I can use it. However, if they mark it as confidential, I won't. And all the companies give me a lot of very confidential information. So I can't talk, some of that goes to that in their cases. But look, I mean, ultimately, let's say this. I don't know which category they're going to end up in because I got a weighted spreadsheet. I score all these pages. I plug it in, I add the intangibles, and a result happens. Maybe distinction. There are companies, there was one company that did not get winner. Well, let me rephrase. I also have thresholds you have to reach to win. All right. For example, there were 4 companies this year that under my old thresholds from 2020 would have won. But this year, nothing. And I've told the companies that. I let the 4 of them know out of courtesy so they didn't feel horrible about losing. Because all of them put a lot of work into this. With Salesforce and SAP, what that tells you is that there are a number of areas that they simply didn't stand out in enough to have an impact that, let's say, they should have, given what they're claiming. And then second, look, sometimes, keep in mind, one of the things that comes into a big account on this is the submission they give me. And I'm not saying this for Salesforce or SAP, this is for everybody. You can be, another example, there was another company years ago in a specialized area of sales that would have won. It should have won because they were a pretty market dominating force, but the submission was such a piece of crap that they didn't. And that's going to happen. Look, if I'm viewing this away from the watch list, I know the impact they're having, but that part of this is they have to prove impact, right? I don't have to go and prove it for them. Now, that said, with every company that after the registration withdrawal deadline is passed, that's still registered, I start doing ancillary research related to what I know, even before the submission comes in, related to what I know I need to look for. I have very specific things to look for. Sometimes it varies company to company, but I know what I have to do. And I do several hours in each case of all the submissions that are there after the withdrawal, official withdrawal is out, time is up.
So Paul, I'd love to be a fly on the wall. I'm sure you have some calls where people are really upset with you. Because at Gartner, I sat through a few of those, especially consulting. Systems integrators used to be particularly sensitive to this. But how do you handle, I'm sure you have 1 or 2 annoyed vendors a year.
Never get them.
Really?
You know what? Well, there's a reason. If you actually read the instructions I give you on the watch list, They're really explicit. And I repeat over and over in the watch list questionnaire what you have to do. And the other thing is, as I've made it clear to everybody in this, my job is to get you to lose this, not win it. Right? So don't, basically saying, you can't complain to me. I'm not gonna, once it's done, it's done. I give you all the leeway in the world to do it right. And if you do it right and you prove the impact and you can prove 3 years out, you win. I don't care if you're my favorite client, right? And you've been my best friend for 100 years, you're still going to lose if you don't do this. And that's true. It's happened many times. My disclaimer is some of my clients enter this. Some of them win, some of them lose. Some of the non-clients, companies I don't have as clients enter this. Some of them win, some of them lose. That's pretty much the disclaimer, because it's irrelevant to my client. And nobody ever, plus, look, let's face it. I mean, I may growl, but obviously a lot of people, I have a pretty good, people like me generally. So nobody really complains, because I think it's not going to hurt my feelings, but well, I'll tell you an interesting backstory. Without mentioning, somebody sent in a complaint about the company, that one of the companies that won, saying, how could they win? Their book of business was down X dollars, X percent over the last year, blah, blah, blah. And this was a former employee of that company. And I sent him a note back saying, well, here's the thing. One, the book of business being down is not a measure of impact. It might impact them a little, but it's not, that doesn't tell me their impact could be fantastic and still be down. There's no direct correlation. Number two, pardon me if I don't take this seriously, since I know you used to work for them and you weren't happy when you left. So I don't really care what you're saying. And the person sent a note back saying, well, that's a good point.
You are a nice guy, Paul.
Well, I'm not trying to hurt anybody. I mean, the reality is, but I also know what I need to do for this. There's a company that lost by 1/100 of a point once. Well, more than once, actually. There's a company that didn't get into distinction by 1/100 of a point over the last 3 years, let's say. I get that all the time. And you could be literally my brother and you still wouldn't win. If you're 100th of a point down and you don't make it, you don't make it. And again, I could love the company and you could be a client. It doesn't matter. If you don't win by 100th of a point, then you don't win. And it's always been that way. And I've never wavered on that for a second. Because look, this award, from my standpoint, does two things. One, it has to mean something for people who have just sent me 100-page entries. I mean, keep in mind, Zoho sent me the world's longest one I've ever had, 259 pages. Oracle's was 102. ServiceNow was 127. Anaplan was 102. I had 7 over 100. Average 71.
259 pages from Zoho. That's not the reason they made it to the top 4. Right?
No. There's another company 2 years ago that sent me one well over 200 pages, didn't win anything. I felt bad for them, but they didn't win. Now, it's page size doesn't matter. But I'll tell you what does matter is this is another one of the intangibles. And even though I don't look, most of the time it's a Word doc I send out. Okay, so you send a Word doc out. What do I get back typically? The answer is in the Word doc. But we're in a world where the visual matters, right? And so you're not going to lose points for sending me a Word doc, but you'll gain points if it's visually presented, right? If it's well presented. And only 2 companies did that this year, Creatio and Thunderhead. They had the best presentations by fairly wide. Thunderhead went to the point of even changing the font to make it more
but it was
elegant.
Still in Word, or did they create it? Did they send you a video, or they send you?
No. I don't allow videos except as ancillary stuff. One of the things is you're answering a question, you answer it in the submission. Any links you send me is secondary stuff you want to send me. But if you don't answer the question fully in the submission, you've got a problem, right? And I'm not interested in having to go outside and look at 100 links. I'm dealing with 59 entries, 4,000 pages. You really think I want to spend my time? Click, let's go watch that. Click, let's go look at that. Click, right? I don't. So, all of those things come into play. I mean, it's a super complex thing, but this will be the last year, and then I'm not handing it off. It's just going to go. Well, who could I hand it off to? How could I ever explain this to anybody?
I mean, something that's survived 20 years in the industry deserves a handoff.
No, to who's gonna be able to remain relatively faithful to the methodology? It's a really complicated methodology.
And read 4,000 pages. Yeah.
But you know what I am going to do? I am going to turn that questionnaire into a template that people can use to assess their own companies and give it out for free. Let people have it. It's a really good template for that, I think.
So, Paul, you've had Adobe for the last 10 minutes.
Oh, okay. So these are the actual regular winners. There were 12 of them.
Okay.
Adobe, who, by the way, in a pitch for thing tomorrow, we're doing tomorrow, which is actually the 15th. So I have no idea how timeless this is going to be. We're doing a Adobe watch party, actually. So they'll be at noon. Well, 11:50 a.m. was starting, and we'll go on till watch party's over, basically, which is probably an hour and a half. Okay, so Adobe won.
This is related to the summit, right?
Yes. So this was the surprise winner. This was a surprise winner and a plan. Did not expect that. Every year there's usually like one or two surprises who I would not expect to win, and they did. So they were the surprise winner.
So did they present on their S&OP, sales and operations planning? Yeah,
basically, yes. I mean, that's what even though it's called the CRM Watchlist, it covers a lot more categories than that. And I even added 4 new categories for this year. Creatio, Microsoft, Pegasystems, Pros, Salesforce as a winner, SAP as a winner, Sugar CRM for the first time in quite a while. Usually they have not succeeded. Viva, not a shock at all there. Viva owns 85% of life sciences market.
Right, for the vertical focus, right?
Right. Yeah. Verint for the 3rd time maybe over the years. And finally, Exactly for their self-performance management side. And then you saw the 4, this is the distinction again: Oracle, ServiceNow, Thunderhead, and Zoho.
You didn't have any field did you have any field service representatives at all?
A couple, but they were pretty poor. Okay. Again, I don't, a lot of people say, well, why didn't you name? And I tell them, because they didn't submit. I can only name the companies that submit, right? I'm not soliciting companies. I mean, I'm soliciting companies generally, but I'm not looking for a particular company to come and do something with me, right? And it's tough, but these companies really worked hard. But the other thing we did was category winners too. So this was for the impact statements, which is where your own view of yourself, basically, and the impact. Those were the 2 winners. Mission and vision, clearest on was ServiceNow. Technology, Thunderhead, right? Customers, Salesforce. But that was very close. Privacy, Thunderhead again. And that's a very interesting category. If you want, what I can tell you is partners, well, I'll finish this. If you want to take another 2 minutes, I can tell you about what I found, the patterns I found, good and bad. That's interesting. Marketing strategy was Pega. Outreach was Salesforce and Zoho. Culture was Pros and Zoho.
Outreach to who?
That's a combination of AR, PR, things like that. Yeah. The Salesforce effectively wins for the best program. Zoho wins for the best, kind of the best small program. Yeah. I don't want to make them, there's no relativity in these. These are a little more absolute. Market impact, actual market impact, Adobe and Salesforce. And that might sound odd since it's an impact award. How come Salesforce didn't win with distinction? Again, 3 years out. Never forget 3 years out. Culture was Pros and Zoho. Pandemic response was Salesforce. Now, we also had some shout outs. Best social media strategy was SAP, bar No, Margot Heiligman's strategy there was out off the charts, the best. Best presentation was, I told you, Creatio and Thunderhead. Most promising companies were Contentful and Optimizely, neither of whom won, both of whom would have won under the old system. There were four, as I said, those were the two most promising. Now, the last thing I will show you, which is really kind of interesting. So these are the top four good trends. Now, again, I'm calling them trends here, but they're really patterns. Basically, my sample size is 59 submissions. Okay, it's not a true study. This was first. Composable architecture, no-code development, low-code applications dominate the evolution of almost all the offerings. And I mean, regardless of what category they fell in, this was a thrust. And I would say if I'm picking anything, it's the no-code part in particular that are of the most, that was fascinating to me. This is the other thing. Platforms and ecosystems are now mainstream, meaning that's how people are looking at going to market, right? Which was really, again, interesting because a lot of companies have given it lip service, but now I'm seeing evidence that they've actually reorganized themselves as companies to go to market along these lines. This one was just, this is a slogan, really. I don't know that very many of the companies actually meet the requirement that this sort of implies. But it was astounding how many of the companies said that part of their overall culture or strategy or something was meeting the customers where they are. And that's, look, I mean, again.
Not in a physical sense.
No. No, it's more like if they want to communicate this way, we'll accommodate. It's really accommodating the customers. But, and it was implemented in various ways according to the kind of company you are. But this seemed to be a common theme. At the same time, I would not say that most companies are doing it all that effectively. And then finally was an emerging definition of the idea of being channelless, which was, one of the last thing I did was an optional question, which was, here's terms, give me your company's definition of these terms. And then I basically said, if you don't believe in the terms, say that. We don't believe that. It's not something we talk about. We don't think it's real, whatever you want. So, but what's really interesting, because we're talking, what's the interesting things going on, and people are trying to get past omni-channel. This is how they go past omni-channel, which is defining the customer's interactions with you from the standpoint of the experience that they're having. Hold on, let me get rid of it. Defining the customer's interactions with you from the standpoint of the experience that you would like them to have or that they are having, right? And that so that they're not sitting there being concerned about what channels they're on. They're being concerned about the actual interaction itself, the conversation, the glitz and glamour aspects, whatever, but they're being concerned with the actual interaction. So, which is an interesting thing. And a lot of companies were defining it as the next step beyond omni-channel, which is really interesting thing. Now, the two bad ones that I would say were predominant, and these were really, well, let's say this. There's one really, really astoundingly horrible one, which was the unbelievable lack of innovation and creativity that's out there. Unbelievable lack thereof, right? Just astounding how many. Now, when it came to operational soundness, these companies were off the charts great in some cases. But when it came to true creativity or innovation, a little bit of technology innovation, sure, but nowhere else. Nowhere else. And I would say if I'm picking out of 59 companies, how many companies were truly showing some signs of genuine creativity and innovation? 3. That bad.
Paul, that doesn't surprise me. I've talked to a number of enterprise architects, and I go, the industry's been blessed with people like Larry and Hasso, and these are enterprise architects, right?
Yep, exactly right.
But they're not process visionaries. They're not reimagining the business as it should be, right? Amazon's reimagined the warehouse, completely reimagined it.
Yep.
We're not seeing that from many software companies.
You're exactly right. And that shows up. It really showed up. And the second one, which is, is a real lack of like, remember what we spoke about last time on the show, what the emergence of the seismic generational power shift. A complete lack of awareness of that is built into any of the go-to-market. Complete lack of awareness. I saw one company had a tremendously good, I call it marketing strategy framework. But when you drill down, it just showed no sense of the fact, wait a minute, there's nothing here that would even vaguely be interesting to a millennial power decision maker.
Is that, Paul, would you say, is that because the buying center is still, baby boomers? The money still hasn't moved down to the millennial buyer? Is that why?
There's two reasons I would probably say it. I think that is one. Although the money actually is starting to move down because look, I mean, SAP is run by a millennial. Think about it, right? And I'm not talking about how good or bad a job he's doing. I'm just talking about the fact he is one. And there are a lot of other people at that company in particular who are millennial on the board and things like that. All right. So that tells you something. Okay. Again, that's just a single indicator, but that's one thing. So I do think part of it's a lack of awareness of the fact that, you know what, we need to, again, impact 3 years out. 3 years out, those are the people who have the money, not baby boomers, right? So, and that will be absolute and universal? No. Will it be still in transition? Yes. Will it be, though, leaning a lot more toward millennials? Yes. The other side, and the other thing was, and I'll put it this way, and it kind of goes a little bit to this, was effectively everyone still, and I'm using sales terms here, but not only for that, not for sales purposes. Effectively, everyone's still selling to personas and not people. And it's about time we started or stopped, let's say, trying to appeal to a job description, right? Which is all they're doing when they do that, selling. And as well as I do, every company sells to personas, right? And the reality is we have enough data to sell to actual people. And in effect, we've been doing some of that work in the B2B buying cycle for years, which is, for example, we've always started looking at who are the decision makers, who are the influencers. Those are human beings. They're not companies. They're not job descriptions. They're not job titles. They're people. And you're actually trying to identify those people to understand those people, not what role they play only, right? But companies can't get past that thinking. And the problem is when you're dealing with a whole set of generations that have completely different patterns of or very different patterns, I should say, of consumption of content, which also goes to different ways they think about buying stuff. And you just thinking about a job title, you're not going to think about anything but that job title, not the fact that you're dealing with humans who have a very different way of interacting. And ultimately, you want to sell to anybody, you sell to things that have their self-interest at heart, as well as the company you're trying to sell to, meaning you actually understand the nature of that human being you're actually communicating with, right? And again, we have the data to do that. Might sound peculiar, but I wrote a whole book with that in mind. Have for the common interests of those individuals. We have all the data we need to appeal to 1 million of those individuals simultaneously, so to speak. Commonwealth of self-interest.
Paul, we've done it for 2 decades. What feedback do you get from buyers, not so much the vendors? Do they find your watch list? How do they use your watch list?
Well, keep in mind, I don't actually go out and ask anybody because I don't really care what people do with it. Right. So once I'm done with it, I'm done with it. I did it, met its purpose. That said, I've had over the years a pretty large amount of anecdotal feedback, and the buyers love it because it's part of. And I will tell you this: the ones who communicate with me, again, that's it's obviously in effect a tainted group because they're people who want to communicate with me. So they a lot of them have said it's part of their buying and decision-making process when they can't get the submission, but they look at who won. Then if I've written an article, they'll read the post and then they'll add that to how they make decisions. They said, the buyers have always looked at the winners of the watch list. I remember Michael Mose told me that a while back, that buyers he's spoken to have looked at the watch list, not just the Gartner MQ. I mean, I don't think they look at the same level, but you get the point. They seem to have a positive. To be honest, though, I don't do follow-up to find out. I know what I'm going to do with it, and I just do that.
Well, Paul, you've used up all this time on your silly market list. We didn't give Tom Brady any time. Baseball's
believe
back.
me, he'll be
Baseball
getting
is
enough
back.
time. I
He
know.
should be all over that.
Believe me, when I hang up, I'll be checking the latest trade, right, to see if the Yankees pulled another trade off like they did last night. We'll see.
Paul, this has been fantastic. Thank you for generously explaining and condensing your watch list. Any final thoughts?
No, just one. I really genuinely appreciate the fact you bring me on. I just love talking to you.
We should have allowed 2 hours.
I'm always up for it. For you, I am. Anytime.
Well, let's come back and just do nothing but sports.
Oh, you're on. Let's set the date. I'll leave it to you to let me know when, and then I will make that time.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Vinnie. It was great.